and by your hosting. I want to share my good fortune with you. So I can talk about the work I'm doing around agroecology and patriarchy in Malawi. And I can show you a 5-minute film of how agroecology and patriarchy are important parts of the same struggle. I can talk to you about agroecology in Cuba and Havana and what is happening in that city, and it is not good. I can talk to you about work that's happening in India or in America, some work I'm doing in the city where I live, in Austin, Texas. But let me just tell you a little bit about what I know so that then you can ask me questions. So I will keep it short and entertaining. So, can I just see, how many people here have parents who were farmers? Anyone? One. How many here have grandparents who were farmers? How many people here have great-grandparents who are farmers? Ah, interesting. Great-great-grandparents who are farmers? That's everyone? Okay. So we're not so far removed from some sort of agrarian history. My name means farmer. Patel is a kind of landowner in India. My ancestors were from India. This is going to take a little bit. Yeah. There. This is where my ancestors are from, in India. But they were taken from there by colonists. And my father's side of the family was taken far away from India. They were taken to work in the sugar industry for the British, here in Fiji. My mother's side of the family were taken not to Fiji, but to the other side of the world, to Africa, to work on colonial tea, but work in the tea colonizing that the British did. And then my mother and father ran away from Kenya and Fiji, and they met in London. And they worked in a convenience store. This was where I grew up. I grew up in the basement of a store that sells bad food. And the food has poisoned my family. Everyone in my family has type 2 diabetes. Many of my uncles are blind, and they've had the toes amputated because of the diabetes. Do people here in the have relations to whom this has also happened? Same thing. So, for me, the interesting question is, how? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And clearly it has something to do with the global food system. But what is the global food system? Let me show you a picture. This, if you want one image of the global food system, it's this 1750 picture. It's hanging in a gallery in London. It's called Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. And this has everything you need to understand about the world food system. Let's start with Mr. Andrews, and he owns all of this. Let's look at Mr. Andrews. Okay. There he is. He doesn't give a shit. He only has one button done up just here. The rest of it he's like, I don't care. And he is very, very relaxed. This is as relaxed as it is possible to be in 1750 without being naked. But he should be relaxed. He is in charge. He has a gun, he has a faithful animal, and he has profit. Look at these nice, neat rows. This is a monoculture. This is the opposite of agroecology. Right? It's one crop, and the machines have been used to put the rows nice and straight. And workers have been used to harvest all this. But there are no workers to see here. The workers are cheap. They don't matter. they come and supply their labor, and then they are sent away. But in order for this profitable modern farm, this monoculture to happen, you need to destroy something. This gets straight to Christos's point. In order to develop this, you have to destroy what existed before. And here in the background is one idea of what existed before. What existed was the commons. Before capitalism, you had areas where women and men could survive. They worked together to make sure that, for example, women could run their cattle on this land. And the cattle would poop, and the manure would fertilize the land, and the crops would grow better. And it was a complex agroecological system. But under capitalism, this land was enclosed. It was turned into private property. And women couldn't run the cattle, and all of a sudden, women's wages went down, men's wages went up. And not all men. Again, what's missing here is there are no workers, and you can see the consequences of this very sexist society in the face of Mrs. Andrews. She is not relaxed. She is, look at her. She's wearing clothes for the indoors. She's not happy. And if you look here, this is a part of the picture that's not finished. It was never finished. But they thought that maybe here they would put a picture of a bird shot with her husband, young, or maybe a baby. But either way, what would be there would be the private property of one man and the world that he owned. So the reason that this is a picture of the modern food system is because, firstly, it shows the power and the domination and the patriarchy of this man over this land. It shows the relationship between him and her. It shows the monoculture. It shows the history of what was left behind. And it also shows that there are no workers who matter, even though the workers' work absolutely does matter. But where are the workers? The workers have been sent to become the proletariat in the cities. They have been sent in Europe to the first favelas, to the first slums. And that's important because in order for modern capitalism to work, this European picture has been written across the world. These in red are countries that Europe has colonized. And you can see that it's pretty much the entire planet, and pretty much the same model of agriculture and of domination and of patriarchy, and of monoculture in particular. And that carries on, it makes it possible for flows of resources to come and feed people in the cities. You know, the question that we had earlier on about why do we only have 3 days? Another way of understanding that is that the world we live in has very complicated logistics. Logistics that have been borrowed from the military and which supermarkets now use. And so if the supply chains are so tight that if there's one cut in the supply chain, there's only 3 days of slack. So in order, for example, for the bananas to be picked in time here, to make it up here, it has to be timed like a war. And that's what, there is a global kind of writing of this war across the surface of the planet. But that means, and just one more thing, it means that there's always a quest for more territory, more value, more cheap nature. And that means killing. And in particular in Brazil, there's killing. This is a map of killings by large businesses in 2017, particularly against indigenous people defending land. Brazil is the country with the highest number of killings. And what's particularly interesting is that in years past, the companies that were doing the killing were mining companies. And today, the #1 killer of land defenders is agribusiness. It's an important change. The food system is now slaughtering indigenous people in the way that we once thought that just it was the mining and the oil and gas industry. This is for cheap soy and for palm oil in Asia. Now, all of this matters for favelas because favelas and poor parts of cities have always been viewed as dangerous. As both dangerous and important, useful for capitalism. Because here is where you can find cheap labor, cheap people to work in what was once the shipyard, cheap domestic workers to clean the houses of the rich, and low-cost sources of care to reproduce the working class. But the problem for capitalists was that the slums were growing. And this, if you don't know this man, he's important to understand. He was the world's first paid economist. His name is Thomas Malthus. He worked as a colonial economist for the British East India Company. And he had this idea that he had this famous curve that food production can only increase a little bit at a time, but populations breed and breed and breed, and at some point there would be catastrophe. And you see, because if you have a plot of land and you work it, you can get 1 kilo of food. Next year you'll get 2 kilos. The year after that, 3 kilos. But if you have 2 children, then they will have, or if you have 2 or 3 children, then they will have 3 children, and they will have 3 children, and so on, and all of a sudden there will be more mouths to feed than food. And this thinking was behind what Christos was saying around the fear of communism, because this is a graph based on Europe, on the US foreign policy establishment. They thought that in 1985 we would reach the point of catastrophe. There would be not enough food and everyone would become communist. But they thought everyone would become communist because the food would run out and there would be too many people. And this fear of the working class, the fear of the poor, is both what allows more food to be produced for poor people, but also for it to be very bad food, and for it to take away for poor people's sovereignty. So for me, this was brought home through the food riots that we saw globally in 2008. There's a long history of urban unrest that is, from the outside, the elites think of it as poor people running out of food, and so we will just fix the problem with more food. But if you look inside these food rebellions, what do you see? You see demands for concrete political change, where this is from Haiti, where Jean-Bertrand Aristide should have been Prime Minister. This is from Mexico before Lopez Obrador became president. And this is from America, where food riots led women to win the vote. It was food riots that made it possible for women to have the vote. So not only are policymakers scared of the urban poor, you can win victories by striking back. And one of my favorite, so these are the food riots that have happened so far in the 20th century. And there will be more to come. We know that because of climate change, food will become increasingly expensive, but also that we will see increasing militancy among the poor. And that is born of a faith that's very old. I mean, we've seen it in Europe, that this is what Christos might call a pacification strategy. In Europe, when working poor people in favelas, in slums, didn't have enough food, they were given allotments. They were given land to farm. Not because the rich were like, oh, they would make great farmers. No. They were given land to farm because otherwise the rich were scared of what they would do when they organized. And the modern example of that is from a town I like a lot. I used to live in, this is a t-shirt from it, Oakland. So Oakland's Black Panthers, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Can you raise your hands if you know about the Black Panthers? A little bit? Then let me, for those of you who are not aware, they defended themselves against the police. But they realized that if there's going to be deep change, then you need to do things more than just survive. So they had what were called survival programs. Programs where they had free food before school, and free school meals, free medical care, free shoes, free walks home for the elderly who were scared to be in the neighborhood. They would walk home with their guns to protect the elderly. And they had 42 survival programs. But these survival programs were not just about making it home alive. No. Because if you make it home alive, then you're scared for the next day. So what the Black Panthers were always about was this idea of survival pending revolution. Survival pending revolution. And so when they had these breakfast programs for the children before school, there was both an understanding that we had to cook and eat together, but there was also the understanding that we gather to imagine what life is going to be like after capitalism. And this is why the American federal government was so scared. The American federal government didn't want this to happen at all, but it was awkward for the US government to say, you should stop feeding children. And so, as a result of this, the US government started feeding children. And at the same time, they started to smash this organization because it was too dangerous. But to feed children, if a church feeds children, it's fine. Because the church wants to keep things as they are, and maybe, God's love will shine on the children. But this is about people being powerful. And this is why it's so dangerous. But this kind of story is one that I can tell you. And maybe I'll stop now, because it's not fair on these guys. Look at them, their back is about to break. But I can, I have 5 minutes of film from some work we're doing in Malawi around agroecology and patriarchy. I can talk to you about the work I'm doing in Austin around food and hunger, or Detroit. Or tell me how I can serve you. But in the meantime, thank you for listening.